The automatic doors slid open with a hiss, and Maya Johnson stepped into the late afternoon sun, plastic bags in both hands. It was supposed to be an ordinary Saturday. Milk for breakfast, apples for her lunch boxes, diapers for her sister's baby. Nothing more. She tucked her wallet into her purse, the receipt folded neatly inside, like her mother had always taught her. Keep your receipt, Maya. Some people will need more proof from you than others. She adjusted her grip on the bags, smiling faintly at a toddler waving from a shopping cart nearby. The moment felt small, harmless, every day, until she crossed the store's exit gate. Beep! The sound was sharp, piercing, cutting through the chatter of customers and the hum of grocery carts. Heads turned, eyes locked onto her. A second beep echoed as the sensor blinked red. "Ma'am," a voice barked. A uniformed security guard stepped into her path. Tall, broad-shouldered, his tone carried more accusation than question. "Did you pay for all of this?" The air thickened. Maya's chest tightened, but she lifted her chin. "Yes, of course." She reached into her purse, fingers steady, and pulled out the folded slip of paper. She held it out like a shield. "Here's my receipt." He didn't even glance at it. His lips curled, almost dismissive. "Receipts can be faked. Empty the bags." The people around them slowed, gathering into an unspoken circle. A woman whispered, "I knew it." Someone pulled out their phone. The toddler's mother tugged the cart closer, as if danger radiated from Maya herself. Heat rushed to Maya's face. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the floor. But her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Never shrink. Never let them strip your dignity." She steadied her breath. "I paid for everything," she repeated, voice firmer now. She held the receipt higher so anyone could see. "Every single item is right here, listed." The guard's stare hardened. "Then you won't mind proving it." A hush fell. The hum of checkout lanes seemed far away. Maya's hands trembled as she lowered her bags onto the floor. She knew what this was. Not about groceries, not about a slip of paper. It was about her skin, her presence, her presumed guilt. She pulled out the carton of milk, set it down. Then the apples, the diapers, one by one under the gaze of strangers. Humiliation prickled her skin. Each item matched the line on her receipt, but the guard's expression never changed. She glanced around the circle of watching faces. Some looked curious, others judgmental. No one spoke for her. She was alone in a trial staged in the middle of a grocery store lobby. Maya's throat tightened, but her voice didn't break. She locked eyes with the guard and said slowly, deliberately, "Look at the receipt. It tells the truth." The guard didn't move, didn't soften. The circle of eyes stayed glued to her, waiting for a verdict. In that moment, Maya realized this was no longer about shopping. It was about proving her right to exist in that space without suspicion. And she wasn't about to walk away quietly. Have you ever been treated like guilty until proven innocent? Maya's story doesn't stop at a grocery store doorway. It exposes what happens when bias hides in plain sight. Stay with us, because the receipt in her pocket will reveal more than she ever expected. Hit like, leave a comment, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.
Maya's life had never been about drawing attention. At 32, she had built her days on discipline and routine, small, steady acts that kept her world in order. She worked as a bank associate in Queens, the kind of job where details mattered, balancing ledgers, reviewing applications, ensuring every document was stamped, signed, and properly filed. Precision was her comfort zone. Her childhood had made it necessary. Growing up, her mother, Denise, always reminded her and her brother, "Keep your papers, keep your records. People like us don't get the benefit of the doubt." It wasn't paranoia, it was protection. Maya learned early that proof mattered, sometimes more than the truth itself. At home, those lessons showed up in little rituals. Maya saved every receipt in a shoebox under her bed when she was younger, just in case her mother needed them later. As an adult, she carried that habit forward, folding receipts into her wallet, keeping files of statements, knowing that paper trails were a shield in a world that too often doubted her word. Outside of work, she was thoughtful but reserved. Weekends were for errands and family visits. She often spent Saturdays with her younger sister and her toddler niece, helping with groceries, folding laundry, or just sitting in the living room sharing stories. Family grounded her. The day of the grocery store incident had been nothing out of the ordinary. Her sister had texted that morning asking if she could pick up diapers on her way home. Maya made a list: milk, apples, cereal, diapers, a couple of cleaning supplies, and stopped by the big box store near her apartment. Inside, the shopping trip was unremarkable. She navigated the aisles quickly, her list nearly memorized. She greeted the cashier politely, placed her items on the belt, and tapped her debit card. The register beeped, the receipt printed, and the cashier smiled. "Have a good day." Maya folded the slip and slid it into her wallet without thinking, the way she always did. It should have ended there. Walking out with her bags, Maya wasn't thinking about bias, suspicion, or humiliation. She was thinking about dinner. She was thinking about dropping the diapers off for her sister. She was thinking about Sunday, about resting before another week at the bank. But life, she knew, had a way of shifting in an instant. A moment of routine could suddenly become a test. And that afternoon, it happened in the narrow space between the checkout lane and the sliding doors, where a beep turned her from customer to suspect. Later, she would wonder if something about her caught the guard's eye. Was it the way she held her shelf? Was it her skin? Her presence? She had done nothing unusual. She had shopped, she had paid, she had followed every rule. Yet when that alarm went off, she realized her mother's warning was alive and present. Proof wasn't optional. It was survival. And still, even with proof in her hand, the guard had looked at her as though the receipt meant nothing. That was the wound, the knowledge that sometimes, even when you did everything right, the world still wrote you into the wrong story.
The grocery store had been bustling that afternoon. Aisles packed with shoppers, pushing carts, children tugging at sleeves, the faint hum of pop music playing overhead. For Maya, it was routine. She knew the layout by heart. She started in produce, selecting a bag of shiny apples. Then she moved through the dairy section, plucking a carton of milk from the cooler. In the baby aisle, she picked up the pack of diapers her sister had requested. Nothing about the trip stood out. No rushing, no distractions, just the steady rhythm of weekend errands. Maya's cart filled with items chosen carefully, each one checked off her list. At checkout, she placed her groceries neatly on the belt. The cashier, a young woman with a bright smile, scanned each item, sliding them into bags. They exchanged small pleasantries about the warm weather, about how busy the store had been all day. When the last item beeped across the scanner, Maya tapped her debit card, entered her PIN, and watched the screen flash, approved. The receipt printed, the cashier tore it from the machine, handed it to Maya, and said warmly, "Have a good day." Maya smiled back. She folded the receipt in half and tucked it into her wallet. Simple. Ordinary. Done. She adjusted the bags in her hands and headed toward the exit. As she passed through the sliding doors, a little girl in a shopping cart waved at her. Maya waved back, laughing softly, her heart light with the kind of joy small gestures bring. Then came the sound. Beep! It wasn't a loud alarm, but sharp enough to cut through the hum of conversation. The red light on the security sensor blinked. Maya froze mid-step. For a second, she thought it was nothing. A machine glitch, maybe. Those gates beeped all the time, triggered by items not properly deactivated. She expected the guard at the door to wave her through, the way they often did with other customers. But he didn't wave her through. Instead, he stepped forward. His shoes squeaked against the polished floor as his voice rang out, loud enough for people nearby to hear. "Ma'am, did you pay for those?" The moment snapped. Heads turned, a mother pulling her toddler closer, a man whispering to his wife, the curious glances that burned hotter with each passing second. Maya's chest tightened.
She nodded quickly, her voice steady. Yes, I paid. She slipped her hand into her purse, pulling out the folded receipt. She held it out for him to see. But the guard didn't take it. He barely looked at it, his brow furrowed, his mouth tightening into a skeptical line. Receipts can be faked, he said flatly. Empty the bags. The words landed like a stone. Around her, the air changed. A hush fell over the entrance, the tension thick. People lingered, pretending to rearrange their bags or check their phones, but their eyes stayed fixed on Maya. She looked down at her bags. Milk, apples, diapers, cereal. Ordinary things. Paid for. Fair and square. And yet standing there under the guard's gaze, she felt stripped of dignity, reduced to a suspect before a silent jury of strangers. Her hand tightened around the receipt. The paper was flimsy, fragile, but it was also her shield, the proof her mother had always told her to keep. Maya drew in a breath, steadying herself. She looked the guard in the eye. Every item in here is paid for. This receipt proves it. But already she could see it in his expression. The paper in her hand wasn't what he saw. What he saw was her.
The guard's face was hard, unmoved by Maya's calm insistence. His stance widened, hands on his hips, as though he were standing watch over a crime scene instead of a woman carrying groceries. "Ma'am," he said louder this time, his voice slicing through the murmurs around them. "Empty the bags, right here, right now." The command wasn't a request, it was a performance. Maya could feel it in the way his voice projected, in how he made sure the growing circle of shoppers could hear him. He wasn't asking for proof, he was delivering a spectacle. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She could sense the judgment in the glances surrounding her, quick, cutting looks from people who didn't know her life, but already had their conclusions written. One woman in the crowd whispered sharply to her husband, not quietly enough. "I knew it." The word sliced deeper than the guard's suspicion. Maya held the receipt higher, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "I paid for everything in these bags. It's all here. Look at the list." But the guard shook his head, his lips curling with disdain. "Receipts don't prove you didn't sneak something past the register." He leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing as though he were daring her to resist. Humiliation washed over her. She wasn't just being doubted, she was being stripped of dignity in front of strangers. She glanced around, desperate for even one face of support. But most people looked away, unwilling to challenge authority. A few, phones out, had started recording. Her throat tightened. She thought of her mother's words, spoken so many times over the years. Always carry proof. People will question your word before they question their prejudice. Maya had carried that receipt like a talisman, and still, here she was, proof in hand, accused anyway. Her mind raced. If she refused, would they call the police? Would she be dragged out in handcuffs in front of everyone? The image burned in her chest. Headlines that never mentioned the receipt, only the suspicion. She bent down slowly, her fingers trembling as she set the bags on the polished floor. The guard stepped closer, looming. "Go on. Show us what you've got." Her cheeks flushed hot, but her hands moved with mechanical precision. She pulled out the carton of milk, set it down, then the bag of apples, then the box of cereal, then the diapers. Each item placed carefully, each one a reminder that she had done everything right, followed every rule, paid every cent. Still, the guard's expression didn't change. "This doesn't prove you didn't slip something else in," he said, his tone dripping with suspicion. "People try tricks all the time." Gasps rippled through the circle. Someone muttered, "Unbelievable." But Maya couldn't tell if they meant the accusation or her. Her humiliation deepened, heavy as stone. She wanted to shout, to demand justice, but fear knotted in her stomach. Any sudden move could be twisted, misread. Then a voice pierced the silence. A teenager standing off to the side, phone camera pointed steadily at the scene, called out, "She showed you the receipt! Leave her alone!" It was a small spark, but it broke through the quiet. Maya lifted her chin, clinging to that flicker of solidarity. The receipt was still clutched in her hand, fragile but undeniable. And she knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end of the story. This was only the beginning. The items lay on the cold floor in neat rows, as if Maya were staging an exhibit of her innocence. Milk, apples, diapers, cereal, every last one accounted for. The guard stood over her, arms crossed, his shadow stretching long beneath the fluorescent lights. Maya's chest burned with shame, but her voice refused to waver. "Everything matches. Here's the receipt. This is proof." She held the slip of paper out again, her fingers trembling. The guard didn't move to take it. Instead, he spoke louder, his words sharpened to pierce the crowd's ears. "Doesn't mean she didn't slip something else. Thieves know tricks. We've seen it all before." A murmur rippled through the gathering onlookers. Some looked uneasy. Others leaned in, hungry for drama. To them, this wasn't humiliation. It was entertainment. Maya felt the weight of dozens of eyes pressing down on her. She wanted to disappear, but she knew that walking away now would only fuel his narrative. Guilty, running, caught. So she stayed. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She ignored it. She could hear the faint click of someone's camera, the low whisper of another recording video. Every second of this ordeal was being documented, not by the store, not by the guard, but by strangers with phones who might spin the story whichever way they wanted. She thought of calling the police herself, but fear seized her. Would they believe her? Or would they see only what the guard saw, a suspect, not a customer? Maya clenched her fists. She had followed every rule, paid every cent, kept every slip of proof. Yet here she was, being treated as though none of it mattered. "I'd like to speak to your manager," she said finally, her voice ringing sharper than she intended. The guard's eyes narrowed. He smirked, almost satisfied. "Fine, but don't go anywhere." As he radioed for the store manager, Maya stood straighter, her hands shaking but her resolve hardening. Around her, whispers swelled. A woman muttered, "Just let her go, she showed the receipt." Another whispered back, "If she didn't do anything, why's the alarm go off?" The store's manager arrived minutes later, a man in a crisp button-down shirt, his face already creased with irritation. He glanced at Maya, then at the guard, then at the items on the floor. "What's going on here?" "She tripped the sensors, might have stolen something, claims she paid." Maya stepped forward, holding up the receipt like a flare in the dark. "I did pay. Everything is right here. Your cameras will show it. Check them." The manager sighed, rubbing his temple. "Ma'am, if you didn't steal, why are you so defensive?" The words cut deeper than the alarm had. Defensive. She had been forced to unload her groceries onto the floor, accused in front of strangers, her character shredded, and still, her calm insistence was twisted into guilt. Her throat tightened. But her mother's lesson surged back. Don't let them write your story. Speak your truth. "Check the cameras," Maya said firmly. "You'll see I'm right." For a beat, silence hung in the air. Then, from behind the counter, a young employee spoke up softly, almost nervously. "She's right. We should check." Maya turned toward the voice, a teenager, maybe 19, eyes flicking nervously between her and the manager. It wasn't loud, but it was support, something solid to cling to. The manager sighed again, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, we'll review the footage."
Maya exhaled, her hands shaking as she gathered her things back into the bags. For the first time, she felt the tide shift ever so slightly. It wasn't vindication yet, but it was a step toward the truth.
The minutes crawled by as Maya stood near the customer service desk, her groceries now half bagged, half scattered, while the crowd slowly dispersed. Some people shook their heads as they walked away. Others lingered, pretending to browse nearby displays, but sneaking glances at her. The humiliation clung to her like a heavy coat she couldn't remove. The manager tapped his fingers against the counter while the young employee disappeared into the back to pull the footage. The guard leaned against the wall, arms folded, a faint smirk tugging at his lips as if he had already won. Maya held her receipt tightly in one hand. The paper was crumpled now, damp from her palm, but she refused to let go. Her heart pounded as she thought of her mother's warnings. Always keep the evidence, because sometimes they won't see you, only their assumptions. Finally, the teenager re-emerged, carrying a tablet connected to the camera system. He looked nervous, but his voice was steady. "I queued up the footage from Lane 7 at 3:41 p.m., he said. The manager leaned over the screen. The guard rolled his eyes, muttering, "She probably switched bags after the register." But the video left no room for doubt. It showed Maya at the checkout, her items placed one by one on the conveyor belt. The cashier scanned them. The total flashed on the screen. Maya topped her card, the machine beeped, and the receipt printed. Clear, indisputable. "Everything matches," the young employee said, glancing at Maya before turning back to the manager. "Every item in her bag was scanned and paid for." The manager's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't look at Maya. Instead, he shifted toward the guard. "Well, anything to say?" The guard shrugged, his smirk faltering but not disappearing. "Mistakes happen. Just doing my job." Just doing my job. The phrase twisted like a knife. His job hadn't been to protect the store. It had been to humiliate her, to treat her as guilty first, to ignore the proof in her hand. Her voice shook, but her words were sharp. "This job isn't humiliating people who look like me in front of strangers. Your job is to protect against theft, not to assume it every time a black woman walks through the door." The teenager's eyes widened. A couple of customers nearby nodded quietly. For the first time, Maya felt something shift, not in the guard's expression, but in the room itself. The manager cleared his throat. "All right, that's enough. Miss Johnson, you're free to go." Free to go, as though she had been detained, as though she needed their permission to walk out with groceries she had bought with her own money. Maya gathered her bags, her cheeks hot, but her spine straight. She tucked the receipt back into her wallet with deliberate care, then looked the guard squarely in the eyes. "This piece of paper," she said, holding it up, "was enough proof the entire time. You just chose not to see it." She walked toward the doors, each step heavy but defiant. Behind her, she heard a customer's voice mutter, "Unbelievable." This time, she knew they didn't mean her. The automatic doors opened, spilling her into the cool evening air. She breathed deep, the city sounds rushing over her like water. But inside, something still smoldered. Because while she was free to leave, she wasn't free of what had just happened. And she knew this story wasn't ending here.
By the time Maya stepped out into the evening air, the city felt different. The hum of traffic and chatter on the sidewalk couldn't wash away the sting of what had just unfolded inside. Her groceries weighed heavy in her hands, but heavier still was the humiliation sitting like a stone in her chest. She tried to shake it off, to tell herself it was over, but the words wouldn't stop echoing.
Receipts can be faked. Empty the bags. And then, when the cameras proved her right, the guard's dismissive shrug. Just doing my job. Her phone buzzed again. She finally pulled it out. Notifications flooded her screen. Texts from friends, social media pings. She opened one at random and froze. There she was, on someone's TikTok. The video showed her unloading her groceries on the store floor while the guard loomed over her. The caption read, "When a receipt isn't enough because of your skin color." The video already had thousands of views. Comments poured in. "This happens all the time. I've been through this too. Disgusting behavior. Boycott that store." Maya's hands trembled. She hadn't asked to become anyone's headline. She hadn't wanted to be a spectacle. But now the world was watching a moment she could never take back. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, the receipt lying in front of her like a relic. It was crumpled, stained with the sweat of her palm, but still legible. Line by line, every item matched. It should have been enough from the start. She thought of her mother's voice, "Keep your proof." She had done exactly that. And still, she'd been doubted, humiliated, nearly criminalized. Jordan, her best friend since college, called after seeing the video. His voice was filled with anger. "Maya, you can't let them get away with this. File a complaint. Talk to a lawyer. They need to be held accountable." Maya rubbed her forehead. "I don't know if I can go through all that again. It was humiliating enough once." "But you're not just doing this for you," Jordan pressed. "You saw the comments. People have lived this over and over. You could be the one to make them answer for it." Her silence stretched long, because he was right. The next morning, Maya walked back into the store. This time, she wasn't carrying bags of groceries. She carried her receipt, a printed screenshot of the viral video, and a typed letter addressed to corporate. She demanded a formal apology, a review of security procedures, and training to address racial bias. The manager looked startled to see her again. He stammered something about misunderstanding, about sensors glitching. But Maya didn't flinch. She laid the papers flat on the counter. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about every person who's been treated like a criminal for simply existing here. You don't get to shrug this away." Behind her, a few shoppers paused to listen. Maya didn't care. She wasn't hiding anymore. Because if her humiliation had been public, so would be her fight for justice.
The corporate office could not ignore her letter. Within days, the viral video had been shared across Twitter, Facebook, and local news outlets. Commentators dissected every frame, the way the guard dismissed her receipt, the humiliation of unpacking her groceries on the floor, the crowd's silence. Anchors asked the same question. Would this have happened if Maya Johnson hadn't been a black woman? Soon, #ReceiptForJustice began trending. Former customers recounted their own stories, being followed through aisles, accused of shoplifting, stopped at the door despite paying in full. Maya's experience had cracked open something larger, and people were no longer willing to whisper. The store chain released a statement. "We take incidents of this nature seriously. We are reviewing our training and protocols." But the words felt hollow. The comments beneath were scathing. "Stop with the PR spin. Fire the guard. Systemic problem, not a one-off." 2 days later, the guard was gone. The company announced his termination and promised mandatory bias training for all staff. They also pledged to install clearer procedures. When alarms beep, receipts must be checked calmly and respectfully, and cameras reviewed before accusing a customer. But Maya didn't just want apologies or policies. She wanted acknowledgement. And when local reporters asked if she would speak publicly, she agreed. Not for herself, but for everyone's receipt had never been enough. Standing outside the store with microphones in her face, Maya held up the crumpled slip of paper. Her voice carried, steady and unshaken. This receipt should have been enough the moment I walked out the door. But it wasn't. Because sometimes, for people who look like me, proof is never enough. That has to change. The clip aired on evening news broadcasts across the city. Strangers messaged her online. "Thank you for speaking for us." One woman wrote, "My son was stopped last year in the same store. He never wanted to talk about it. Tonight, he saw you. He knows he's not alone." Maya returned home to her small apartment, her groceries tucked neatly into the fridge, but her life forever shifted. The receipt still sat on her kitchen counter, wrinkled but visible. No longer just a record of milk and apples and diapers, it was a symbol. A symbol of humiliation, yes, but also of resilience. Because in the end, the store couldn't erase the video. The guard couldn't rewrite the truth. The world had seen what happened. And Maya had turned a moment meant to shame her into a movement that demanded better. That night, she looked in the mirror and whispered softly, "You were right, Mom. Proof matters, but today, my voice mattered too." For the first time in days, she smiled. Not because the fight was over, but because she knew she had helped start something that wouldn't be silenced.
Maya's story is not just about a shopping trip gone wrong. It's about how quickly ordinary moments can turn into battles when bias hides in plain sight. She did everything right, paid for her items, carried her receipt, followed every rule, and yet a single beep from a censor was enough to strip her of dignity, to place her on trial in the middle of a grocery store. The guard's words, "Receipts can be faked," were more than suspicion. They were a reflection of a system that demands Black women prove their innocence again and again, even when the evidence is right in their hands. For Maya, the receipt was never just a slip of paper. It was her shield, her mother's wisdom, her defense against a world too ready to assume guilt. But what began as humiliation ended as transformation. A stranger's video made her experience undeniable. Her refusal to stay silent forced a company to act, terminating the guard, changing procedures, and facing public accountability. More importantly, it gave others permission to speak their truths. #ReceiptForJustice became more than a hashtag. It became a reminder that silence protects bias, while visibility challenges it. Maya didn't win by walking out quietly. She won by standing her ground, by saying aloud what so many have endured in silence. Proof should be enough. And if you've ever felt the sting of being doubted, overlooked, or humiliated for no reason other than who you are, remember Maya. Remember that the paper trail matters, yes, but so does your voice. If Maya's story struck a chord with you, don't let it stop here. Share this video so more people understand what "just doing my job" can really mean. Comment below with your own story and hit subscribe so we can keep uncovering truths that matter. Because every voice, every receipt, every story counts.